what happens as job seekers as we spend our time going from one job board to another job board to another job board, and we apply for every job. We apply for every job that fits us perfectly. We tune our online profiles, our LinkedIn, our Monsters, our Yahoos. We do everything that we can. And we do get phone calls. We get invited to interviews. We actually sit down in person and do an interview. What happens when we do that month after month after month, and still at the end of the day, we don't get hired? And while many of us are in situations where we can't even get an interview, where we put in a lot of time and a lot of effort, we craft our resumes, and we get crickets. We just get ghosted. Some people, like in the case that we're going to discuss today, actually get interviews, but don't get hired. You're doing everything right. The field that you're in is needing people. You're in a rare situation to where the employer actually needs a body. They're actually hiring. They might actually hire somebody. And that's a great position to be in. But something is happening when they are bringing you in for an interview. You may be doing everything that's right for the employer, to impress the employer, to tell them that you are the right person for the job. Going into an interview and finding out that, hey, I've done great, the interview went perfectly, and still not to get hired is one of the most demoralizing situations you could ever be in. But there are quite a few reasons why you can actually be, not hired. Usually in these situations, when somebody's actually brought into the office for an interview, they're usually in a situation where there's going to be 3 to 5 people who are in the same boat that you are. So it's very common that if you're interviewed, they can simply you could be their second or third choice and they don't pick you. But the question is not, okay, I made it there. The question is not, why didn't they pick me? The question is, what can I do better? What is there more that needs to be considered when I go to the interview? An interview is all about first impressions. Okay? The person, the people, the person, whomever, who is going to actually be doing the interview, especially in person, needs to be able to see you. Needs to be able to make the determination that if I hire this person, when they actually walk in the door on day one, do I have a reasonable idea of how they're going to be able to contribute? And, what kind of personality they have? I mean, just think about it. I mean, would you hire somebody if they had a weird personality that you didn't think was going to fit the culture of the other people you had working there? If you were going to be a cubicle disruptor, would they really want you to be working there? But see, that's the trick. That's the trick about interviews. And most people don't realize this about interviews. Every time you go in for an interview, it's a crap shot. You're literally just going to be throwing the dice against a wall and hoping that the person who is interviewing you likes you and that they are so similar to you that they see themselves in you and they know exactly who and what you're all about. But we don't know that. We don't know that when we go in for the interview. And so it is so important that when you go to the interview that you do this number one thing. You act yourself. And you say, okay, I'm just going to shut off the damn video now because this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. But I do. See, I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. I have seen it. I've seen a lot of good ones and I've seen a lot of bad ones. There's some people who are prepared and some people who are not so much prepared. And really, it comes down to, do I have an idea of the person that I'm interviewing? Is the person I'm interviewing actually going to fit with what I'm trying to accomplish? See, skills are one thing, right? So if we're talking about like, I just need somebody with enough Apple experience, maybe they know how to code in Swift or something. It's one thing to encounter that and be taking that into consideration. But it's another when you talk about culture fit, people fit, whether you're going to make it on the team. And there are other components like, do I think this person is actually going to stick around, or are they going to leave in 3 months? You know, and that can be determined just from the resume. See, I need to be able to make an informed decision as to whether you're going to be a great candidate, a great employee for my company. And so the advice I give my job seekers when it comes to interviewing, now there are things you can do to increase your chances. But the one thing, well, actually, multiple things. The multiple things you cannot do as a job seeker during interviews. You can't be desperate. You cannot be afraid to show who you really are. Because this is what happens. This is what happens. I sit there and I go, yes, well, tell me about yourself. And the employer, the candidate, will sit there and they'll give a nice flowery, I don't know, they'll give some sort of description about where they come from, where they worked. Their eyes will be big and deer and headlight looking, and they'll just be talking. And you can tell this has been rehearsed. And by the time they finish the tell me about yourself section, I have no idea who they are. I have no idea anything about them. Now, granted, I know we're not going to talk about anything personal during this, but I need to know about you. And during the interview, anytime you have an opportunity to sell yourself, like the tell me about yourself section, you need to give stories. You need to have 3 stories planned, at least 3 stories, and use at least one in the tell me about yourself section where you get a chance to really talk about yourself. I'll give an example of a story. When I was in agronomical research, I had an opportunity to find some research fields. I was approached, our team was approached, and we were told, hey, go out and find some research fields that we could use. We want to rent for this amount of money. And how about you go find some farmers and, anybody that is in your network and see if they'd be open to renting. Now, I didn't know anybody. So naturally, I said, well, I got to come up with another way. And so what I did is I spent about an hour and I drove around within a 20-mile area. I said, where would I like a research field? Where would I like a research station so that we could display how awesome our company is and display the research that we are doing so we can be visible, so we can make more money, so we can have impact. And I found 5 locations. I wrote them, I marked them on a map, and I said, yeah, I would like that. And I went and I looked at aerial photos to see their territory, to see if it was going to be enough area. And we needed about 3 or 4 acres. And so I looked at aerial photos and I made sure that the people who owned these areas had enough acres for what we were going to need it for. But I didn't know who owned them. And so I went to the next city over. I went to the assessor's office and I looked it up. At the time, they didn't have the digital versions. I looked up who owned it and where they lived. Got in my vehicle and drove on over to their houses. And I said, hey, we're looking to buy some commercial ground. Would you be interested in selling? A couple said, get the hell off my property. A couple said, well, yeah, for the right price, for $40,000 an acre. And a couple places said, yeah, sure, we'll be open to talk to you. And so I brought my results. I brought them back to the manager. And I said, here's what I found. And to this day, and guess what? They made an agreement with one of those owners. It was a great location. I thought it was perfect. It had a lot of visibility. A lot of farmers were already in that area for an agronomy show. And I found that for them. Now, see, if you could tell a story about you, something that you did, it doesn't have to be something that awesome. It just has to be something. You have to have something prepared. And so when you're able to tell a story, you really get an opportunity not necessarily to sell yourself. And I know a lot of people like to use that phrase, sell yourself, which actually freaks people out. So don't say that. But what it does is it gives you a chance to talk about you, for them to find out something about you. It gives them a chance to get a feel for who you really are. And so that's why telling stories is so important. And so why does that matter to this conversation? So they say, why won't they hire me? Well, maybe because they can't tell who you are. Maybe they don't know anything about you. And actually, that's one of the most common mistakes people make. They think if I am bland, then I will get somewhere. And you will in certain stages. You'll get through. You have to be bland as heck when you're at the very beginning. You know, when somebody is just phone screening, being bland is the most important thing. But once you get to the interview, the real interview, you need to be able to show yourself. You need to be able to show your colors. You need to be able to show that you are somebody that really matters and can really help them. But there's some depth, a little bit too much, unfortunately, that goes beyond this. That goes beyond the common issues that happen during an interview, because sometimes people just don't like you, and they can not like you for various reasons. So what's the real issue? The real issue is that most hiring managers are dumbasses. Most hiring managers have no idea how to find the right person. Most cannot identify a good candidate if it bit them in the butt. And most of the time, they almost literally bite them in the butt, and they still can't tell the difference. Hiring managers choose wrong almost every time. And it's not because they're bad people. It's not because they're unintelligent or anything of that nature. It's just at some point, they are just unable to identify, or they don't ask the right questions to help them identify the right things. But usually what happens that I've noticed when it comes to hiring managers who choose poorly is they grasp onto one thing. So, for example, let's go into software development, and somebody says, and a manager says, we really need somebody with who has been in a Kanban environment. Let's just pretend. And so one person will interview, and they'll say, have you ever worked in a Kanban environment before? And the person will say, well, no, I haven't. Usually we've been all Scrum. And the manager go, okay. And then a second person will say Scrum. Third person will say Scrum. Fourth person will say, yeah, I worked in Kanban about 4 years. And the manager will go, oh, we found our guy. But they didn't listen. That person who did Kanban for Agile didn't have a lot of experience, didn't know anything about databases, and barely knew their way around HTML. And so that manager, without thinking much, hired that person only because of Kanban, ignoring the fact that anybody who could do Scrum can do Kanban as well. I mean, get over it. But that's not what they do. They a lot of times will make an emotional response attached to some skill or some ability or some piece of knowledge. And so that leads us into the next important point about interviewing. You have to have something that differentiates you from somebody else. If you have 5 people who are all interviewing and all of you have the same skills, same knowledge, having one thing that's different can really help you get the job. But sometimes one thing that helps you really get the job is not appropriate. And sometimes that thing is racism, because this is what's really going on. We are in a situation to where we have large companies who all they want to do is they want to make money. They want to grow, and they don't really care what happens to anybody. They don't care what happens to you. All they care is that they get to continue and that they get to be popular, because a lot of people who end up in these large companies just play popularity games. That's all they do. And so a lot of them will do anything in order to be successful, to be popular. And this includes being racist. And so there have been times in our country where people have been racist or biased or whatever against somebody simply by how they look, what they look like. I have heard about people doing choir competitions where people won't get in even if they have the lovely voice, simply because they're too tall or too short. And so certainly in the workplace, if you have glasses, or if you're too fat, or if you're too short, or whatever it is, you're not going to get hired, or you are going to get hired. But see, this is the real reality, is that no matter what we do as people, we cannot put aside our biases. It is not possible. We have a bias for or against people no matter what. Now, it may not be based off of skin color, but maybe we feel a comfort by seeing someone with glasses. Maybe we go, oh, I really like that person. They're driving a Honda. People have biases for all kinds of reasons. I mean, just imagine somebody walks in and they've got let's say a Green Bay Packers tie on, and you say, well, I'm a Lions fan. I sure the heck ain't going to hire that person. And so sometimes, and while it's not always in our control, there certainly is a bias. It could be age. It could be height, weight. It doesn't matter what it is. And truly the scary part about bias, and the fact that sometimes people just won't hire you, the truly scary part is that no matter what we do, no matter what anybody says, no matter what policies are implemented, we can't do anything to stop it. That's it for today. I'm S.P. Graham. This is Jobferno. And as always, choose skills over money.